Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, Central American asylum seekers. We will discuss why so many people are headed for the US border and what they might face when they get there.
Join us with your questions and your comments on the issue live on YouTube or via Twitter.
A caravan of thousands of Central American men, women and children is slowly making its way north through Mexico. They are trekking hundreds of miles on foot, and many say they are fleeing the poverty and violence in their home countries to seek asylum in the United States. But what type of welcome will they receive once they get there? US President Donald Trump has ordered 5,200 US troops to provide support to US Border Patrol, a decision that has prompted outrage from his critics. Trump and other US Republicans are portraying the so-called migrant caravan as an invasion and are using the issue to fire up their political base ahead of midterm elections. Today we want to learn more about the Central American asylum seekers and the issues that have driven them to leave their homes.
So with us to discuss this today on set is Raquel Godos, who's been following the story as a correspondent for the Spanish international newswire, EFE. Aljazeera correspondent John Holman, who has been following the caravan in Guatemala and Mexico. And in Mexicali, Mexico, Hugo Castro, a human rights activist who works with the humanitarian assistance group Border Angels. Welcome to the stream, everyone. I want to start with our community, because a member of our community asked that we cover today's topic, and he writes this: the immigration caravan from Central America. Why are they migrating to the States? What people need to know is not that they want to leave, it is that they have no option. So John, I'll direct that one to you. The why is a question in a lot of people's minds.
Of course, and I think for a lot of people that we've been talking to, we're now covering the second caravan of migrants that's coming through. There's about 1,500 people here. There's about 4,500 on one that's a bit further north going into Mexico. They just stopped in the town of Wixla. We spent this morning with a family, actually. The wife is 8 months pregnant. The husband has had a job as a cobbler repairing shoes, but he said basically that work dried up and he just didn't have any money to provide for his family. He says that they're going with such a heavily pregnant wife. They started traveling from Honduras 14 days ago now, because basically he doesn't want his next child to be born in Honduras where he has no way to provide for him. It's going to be a boy. So that's a pretty common story that we're hearing from people, especially from Honduras. In the past, we've heard more about violence. This time around, it's a lot about the fact that they just haven't got enough to earn a life for themselves and for their families here. Having said that, we also talked to some people from El Salvador in another possible caravan over the other side of the border in Guatemala. And they said that for them, it was a lot about violence. It's a lot about the gangs that are controlling that territory. Almost everyone used the word rent. They said, I just can't afford the rent. And that seemed pretty benign until we asked what that was. And they said they call it rent. That's actually the extortion money that's demanded by the Maras gangs there for every business. They say in between the government and the gangs and the money that they're extorting out of us, we can't survive there. We've got to travel. We've got to look for a future elsewhere.
Hugo, when people talk about violence in their home and their local communities, I wondered if you could just unpack that for us a little bit more. For instance, if a family have relatives in the US, that is an option for them to have their money being extorted from them. Can you explain that a little bit more? What happens to the people that you've met and what's driven them to actually leave their country and then walk to the United States?
Yes, we have been informed by the Central American, especially the Salvadorians and also the Hondurans, that if the criminal members know that you have a relative in the United States, living in the United States, you are extorted. You have to be paying the minimum is $100 per month to this group in order to leave you alone. So there's a lot of pressure for family. They don't care if you don't have a job in Honduras or El Salvador. You have to pay the money. If you don't pay that amount, they could rape your relatives or they can kill you. So there's a lot of violence, and there's no way to protect you because of people in El Salvador and Honduras. don't believe in the police. They know that there's a collusion between the police officers and criminal members, so they don't have an option. They are forced to migrate. They are victims of forced migration, and some of them would like to stay in Mexico, but Mexico is also really violent, and especially in Veracruz, states like Guerrero and Veracruz, and also Michoacán, Jalisco. The violence has increased constantly in the last years, so they don't see an options but to go to the United States,
Sure.
which is see as a land of the free, a more secure place, even though the current president is against migration.
I think that what Hugo is telling us is a good thing about this story, because it allows us to put these kind of stories, the truth of these immigrants coming through all Central America and Mexico, and tell their actual stories, not that they are criminals. If there is something about this that is taking all this attention and is good, is that media now is really taking care of them and telling their stories, as they are saying. It's not true that they are criminals or coming from terrorist groups from Middle East or something like that. It's just people who is in a very weak situation and they need help, and they are trying to find that in other country. And it's something that is covered by the international law, which is something that is not usual. People don't tell that every day, but it's true. I mean, we have some international laws that protect them, and we should listen to them. I think it's very interesting, the fact that we are working more as journalists and we have this opportunity to tell their stories right now, because even though they come to the US day by day since a lot of years ago, their stories sometimes they get blurred between all the political issues and stuff. And that's the bright side of this story, right? That we have this opportunity to tell the truth about them and deny all these political issues that they are saying about them, that they are just not true.
So when we talk about telling the truth and really busting some myths here, I wanted to bring up one, and our panelists can tell us whether this is a myth or not, but Victor here says that from what he has heard, these asylum seekers, these refugees, these migrants are being offered help with jobs in Mexico and a chance to get away from all the crime and corruption they claim to face in their own country, which if they don't take these opportunities and decide to cross the border, they should be arrested. Now, Hugo, I know you mentioned that many don't see an option in Mexico, but John, I wanted to give this one to you, because there are people in the US who say there are other parts of Mexico that these people can go to.
Yeah, I think that's true. Not all of Mexico is riddled by danger right now. And the Mexican government actually has said, we were just over the border with the El Salvadorans in Guatemala. The Mexican government actually crossed over the river to say to them, we've got opportunities, turn yourself in with migration. And the president said it as well, we'll have temporary work programs, we'll see about getting you visas to work to go through the country for 30 days, and we can get you shelter. And the federal government really does seem to make that a bit of a precondition on helping these people in terms of giving them food and water and shelter. The problem, I think, for most of the people that we've talked to for crossing through is that they don't really believe that. They think that will just lead to them being deported in the end. They don't trust the Mexican government. There is a context behind that. Mexico's been pretty tough on Central American migrants crossing through for quite some time now. I don't know if our audience are going to remember that there was a big news story about child migrants getting to the United States. And after that, the United States under President Obama really put its foot down and put a lot of pressure on Mexico to try and stop more of them from getting through. That led to lots of migration patrols and checkpoints on the border. So I think that's the context, really, that the people that are heading through now are saying, we don't really trust the Mexican government to act in good faith in this. It's too early to say, from our point of view, if they are acting in good faith on it or not in this case. They're just desperate not to have this huge mass of people getting to the US border. But a lot of the people, I'd say the vast majority that we've talked to, are just choosing to sleep in the open air in plazas like the one that's behind me. They're going to sleep here tonight rather than stopping in the border and trying to get shelter in government shelters where they feel like they're not going to be able to get out of once they get into those. So that's the sort of the situation on the ground here.
Raquel, there's something that I actually saw on your Twitter feed, which was a little news bulletin from Shep Smith, who works for Fox News. And what he was saying kind of reflects maybe the attitude that is actually happening for part of the US as far as immigrants are concerned. Have a look here on my laptop.
Tomorrow, the migrants, according to Fox News reporting, are more than 2 months away, if any of them actually come here. But tomorrow is 1 week before the midterm election, which is what all of this is about. There is no invasion. No one's coming to get you. There's nothing at all to worry about. When they did this to us, got us all riled up in April, remember? The result was 14 arrests. We're America, we can handle it.
We're America, we can handle it. Why did you share that on Twitter?
First, because I think it was a very powerful statement coming from Fox, because they usually are very pro-Trump in their statements and somehow. And it was very clear and sound how he explained the fact that, okay, they are coming, but come on, they are 2 months away by walk. There is no invasion, and all this rhetoric that we are listening these days is about the elections. Trump is talking about that because he knows that that is going to rally his base a lot. It was one of his main topics during the past election in 2016. And now this issue, these images that we are seeing of the immigrants is helping him to move the turnout in the Republican side. But I think it's very important, this clip, because it shows a very huge thing about us as journalists, the responsibility of not just reproducing some statements or just putting there and just allow them to talk. We have to say, hey, that's what is happening. So there is no invasion, even though all these people is telling you that. So I think it was very powerful and very important to share. Also for the audience, the American audience, it was very important to have that statement. And I think that we are going to see in the next week much more talk about the caravan, even though they are very far. Today at the newsroom we were like, but they are really arriving on this November 6th. It could happen. They can tell us more about it, but there is all this noise about the caravan that is just to get votes from the Republican side. And I don't know at what point the Democrats are counter or fighting all this rhetoric coming from the Republican side. I'm not pretty sure if they have done a good job doing that. I think they have been very soft, not trying to be negative, and they have not been tough enough in order to clarify the facts.
You know, I think what's interesting for our audience to note is that the clip that Femi just played and that you posted on your Twitter feed came just a few hours after the President of the United States tweeted this. Many gang members and some very bad people are mixed into the caravan heading to our southern border. Please go back. You will not be admitted into the U.S. unless you go through the legal process. This is an invasion of our country, and our military is waiting for you. Now, there are several people online who agree with him. I want to read just two of them, and I'll give them to you, Hugo. One person says, there is no misconception. My tax dollars shouldn't be used to take care of people who can't speak English. Lord knows how many criminals there are, but we will be happy to move them in with you. He's tweeting that to the stream, and I would like our audience to take note that he spelled several things wrong there as he accused these asylum seekers of not being able to speak English. Another person writes in that my parents and many other members of my family had to wait years to come to America. They did it legally, and they came from a third world country. You can't just come into a country illegally. It's not right. So Hugo, a lot of this rhetoric that we're seeing has to do with illegal processes. Can you break down what's behind that?
We have to remember that it is a legal process to ask for asylum. That's a right. So they are not doing nothing illegal by coming to the border and asking for asylum. So we have to We have to hear their stories. Many of them their relatives have been killed, and they are running away from violence. They are not trying to go to a shortcut in the United States. They are just pretty scared, and they want to have an opportunity to come to the United States, and we have to provide them with that opportunity. We have to remember that our country is founded by immigrants, many of them running away from religious persecution, and we have to provide this opportunity to Central American and Mexicans, even though they don't speak English. Then you don't have to speak English to prove that you need asylum.
Yeah, the thing is, imagine how bad your life has to be in order to decide that you are going to put your life in risk, your kids' life in risk, and cross thousands of miles through almost the desert. Maybe somebody should tell these people that nobody choose to leave their country in such a bad way for fun, or just because they think they are going to have a nice time. I mean, it's a very tough decision to do, and it's not something that is related to a kind of conspiracy against the US or kind of conspiracy by Venezuela that we have listened this, that is completely, and there is no proof of that. So imagine that situation. We have to put ourselves in their feet, in their shoes, right?
Yeah. John, I just wanted to bring in a couple of people that you met en route, because you've been doing so much reporting along the route, meeting people and getting their stories. You met a young man, it's a boy, it's a kid called Jonathan, and also a young woman called Yesenia. I want to introduce them into our conversation so people can actually see the faces of the people who are leaving their homes. Have a look here.
Jonathan is only 14 and travelling alone. He's here for the same reason as everyone else. He feels he doesn't have a chance in Honduras.
Back home, there's no work and too much crime.
Many, like Yesenia, are trying to get a new start to provide for their families.
I've got a 6-year-old boy, my dad and my sister. I have to help them. There's not enough for food. I've had my electricity and water cut. Everything's expensive and there's not enough to live on.
For many...
John, did you get a sense that Jonathan or Yesenia, did they have a plan for when they actually get to their destination? How are they going to apply for asylum? Had they worked that out? Had they got that far?
Jonathan in particular, he was we saw him just wandering sort of around the caravan on his own. He's a very small 14-year-old as well. I hope he won't mind me saying that.
Yeah.
And so there was a real sort of sense of vulnerability about him. He was very sort of brave, I would say, really. He was just sort of trying to get lifts as he went along. He did have a couple of relatives in the United States. He said that he was going to try and meet with, I forget in which state exactly they were in. And we had contact for him for a couple of days as he just sort of went on his way. He quite liked to actually just phone us, just to sort of talk. I got the sense, just to have the sense that someone was sort of looking out for him. He's not the only unaccompanied minor that's with the caravan, especially the first one. We saw a lot of women and children, and a lot of those children have sort of tried to gang together, really, to try and get further north. Yesenia was interesting because we spoke to her just as the federal police in Mexico had closed off the motorway, and the caravan was really trying to work out what they were going to do. They were trying to link arms together so that they couldn't be separated. In the end, the federal police just moved to one side. I remember Yesenia, she had children back in Honduras. She was pretty scared about what was going to happen then. But it was another sort of strange instance of the Mexican authorities, I think, not really knowing what to do with this caravan, because they don't want the eyes of the world to see them sort of forcibly sending people back, but they don't want President Trump and his administration to see them arriving at the border. That politically is not really an option for them. So really, the people in the caravan, especially at that point, were really sort of caught in the middle of that. I know Raquel was talking about a little bit about that, and it was a sort of a strange non-confrontation in the end.
I wanted to bring in something from our audience. They want to make sure that we do not forget and our audience doesn't forget. Ebony here says, let's not forget that the U.S. was instrumental to political instability in Central American countries, selling arms to criminal gangs, and now they've denied entry into the U.S. No one will migrate in such extreme condition except that there is no hope left back home. So Raquel, keeping that in mind, the history here and there being valid and legitimate reasons why people are coming, when people reach the border, legally what will happen? Because most of them will be coming into a legal point of entry.
Mm-hmm. Well, the fact is that, as Hugo was telling us, they have the right, and it's not illegal entry. So that's also another fact that is not being told properly by some people. And also it's true that the U.S. has been playing a role like a kind of, we are giving you money in order to get your stability, but they don't are really interested in getting these countries more secure and trying to fight the corruption. We have seen this these days in Guatemala with this commission that the UN opened there. And the US has been very soft trying to protect the commission against corruption down there. So I think these kind of comments are quite accurate in the sense that even though there is a fair and good faith coming from the United States in helping some people there, in terms of international policy, it's not that true that that money is being used properly and that the US is putting an eye on how the money is being invested and if it really goes to the right people to make the people's life in Central America better.
Hugo, I have a map which I'm going to put up so our audience around the world can see where people are walking from, these asylum seekers are walking from. So we're going to show them. So we're looking here at Central America. We're going to move into Honduras and Guatemala and literally walking from home, Honduras, through Mexico to the United States. And then when they get there, I'm just looking at your Instagram here for Border Angels Official. USA Today, Pentagon to deploy 5,000 active duty troops to southern border to halt the migrant caravan. How are you advising these asylum seekers about what to do when they actually get to the US border? How are you preparing them for these troops?
We are working in coordination with other organizations in the caravan to be prepared. You know, this is a kind of a Pacific movement. There's no violence involved in it, and also we are coordinating here in Baja California state with 24 shelters in Tijuana and 10 shelters in Mexicali to receive the part of the caravan that is going to ask for asylum in these border towns in the Tijuana, San Diego border, and also the Calexico-Mexicali border. It's really tough, really complicated, really complex to have them, to provide them not only with food, but also with guidance, because they are in despair. They are in despair, but anyway, we have to remember that there is families running away from violence. They're not people, there's no such a group of criminals involved in this action, in this caravan. So yeah, yes, they know that they're gonna part of the United States is not welcome them, but they know that there are a lot of community members and also organizations supporting them.
Sure.
So I'll end here with a comment from Paulina on Twitter, who says, I stand with the migrant caravan. They are our brothers and sisters. I admire their courage. My father made a treacherous journey from Michoacan to California through the Arizona desert. He was not met by an armed military force, politicized by a nationalist president, and a country in which armed white nationalists are emboldened. So my fear is what awaits them. And my hope is that those of us that stand with them meet them at the border with nonviolence in tradition of Dr. King to protect them.
Raquel and John and Hugo, thank you so much for being part of the stream today. Of course, our coverage will continue on Al Jazeera all the time. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.